We are here tonight to consider a question put to this board by the City Commission as to whether the revered and powerful protected class status should be extended to lesbians, gays, bisexuals, and transgenders, otherwise defined in the terms of sexual orientation and gender identity. While I choose to believe this proposal has been put forth with the best of intentions, I believe it is highly misguided. To understand this, let's take a minute to put it in context. The creation of protected classes under the Civil Rights Act of the 1960s was considered a radical move at the time. We're told tonight we're not supposed to think of this as a radical move. It is a radical move, and the 1960s Act was a radical move. As we all know, Europe and America had spent centuries buying and selling the black man from the tribes of Africa, putting them on ships where many died, relocating them to plantations throughout the world, but especially in America, and then violating them physically in abuse and against nature's God by stripping them of their unalienable right to freedom by making them slaves. To a large extent, because of this crime against humanity, America fought a civil war, but the violence of war did not change the heart. So we endured another century where the black man was held down, systematically and consistently in every aspect of our society, and the rest, as they say, is history. History, except that 45 years later, there is a new group that wants to claim this protected class status. In considering their request, it is important for us to remember why we made such a radical decision back in 1964. We did it as a very nominal recompense to centuries of slavery, murder, rape, and systematic denials to an entire race of people to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Tonight, I implore you to consider the historical justification of why we created protected classes in the first place, and whether it really merits extension of this powerful status to the group being considered here tonight. A natural first question should be, is there discrimination in Manhattan, Kansas against lesbians, gays, bisexuals, and transgenders? But this question seems to have been presumed rather than demonstrated. What have we heard so far? We have heard and probably have experienced ourselves that a form of discrimination exists in the hallways of our nation's public schools, though not necessarily by the teachers and the administrators, but rather by the other students. And this should not be downplayed, for it is exactly these students that the parents of homosexual children were hoping and praying would become their friends. But instead they have shown fear, weakness, and even hatred in harassing these young people, discouraging them sometimes to the point of suicide. This reality must be remedied, but unfortunately the proposal before you tonight has nothing to do with peer-to-peer discrimination in our public schools. We can also imagine that homosexual behavior and cross-dressing is probably not highly accepted in the bars of Aggieville, though again, not necessarily by the bar owners, bartenders, and waitresses, but rather by the farm kids or the soldiers or others that have probably had too much to drink and can't think clearly to know that their fellow patrons are just looking for a safe place to have fun on a Friday night just like them. But again, while highly unfortunate, this proposal will not impact how a drunken soldier may choose to treat a homosexual man in Aggieville. And of course, it is worthy of note that much of the actions one patron might take against another already have available remedies at law or equity or simply the fairness of the bar owners and their bouncers. So when we ask if there is discrimination in Manhattan, we must ask if it exists specifically in employment, housing, and public accommodation venues, because these are the only venues that are being addressed by this ordinance. While much of the testimony that has come forth so far has not related directly to the specific proposal at hand, on a personal level, I can tell you, it broke my heart to hear of the young man, this was a couple weeks ago, who was estranged from his missionary parents and from the mother who witnessed her son being tormented with shockingly grotesque writing on the wall of their garage. My heart truly breaks for their suffering, but this ordinance will not change the hearts of the evil people who perpetrate such violence against homosexuals, no more so than the Civil War could cause the hearts of America to recognize that the black man is our brother. Whenever creating policy, we must ask what is the problem and whether the proposed ordinance will solve that problem without unduly stripping the liberty interest of others. So given this background, the question remains, what recommendation should this Human Rights and Services Board give to our City Commission? I'd like to give you a few options to consider. Option 1, ask them to demonstrate a need. This board should recommend that a need be demonstrated specific to the proposal, that is, in employment, housing, and public accommodations. We have not heard of such complaints, save maybe 1 or 2 undocumented and unverified personal testimonies. If gays, lesbians, bisexuals, and transgenders have been discriminated against in our town in these 3 venues, then open up a system for a period of time to allow them to file their formal complaints. If complaints do get filed, then the board can address the bigger issue of whether these complaints justify the radical solution of protected class status, which is inherently designed to strip individuals and entities of their liberty interests. Option 2, demonstrate a will. If a need cannot be demonstrated in our town, then allow the question to be put to the people on a ballot. In a government of the people, by the people, for the people, if we are going to adopt a radical proposal based on undocumented needs, then let's at least let the people decide directly and put it to a ballot. At the end of the day, if there is no need and there is no will, then the only recommendation that makes sense for the Human Rights and Services Board to send to the well-intentioned but misguided City Commission would seem to be, thank you, sirs, for the suggestion, but no, we cannot make any such recommendation. Pragmatically, we've been told multiple times there is a majority on the Commission that fully intends to pass a policy. So let me offer a couple comments about what policy you might recommend. First of all, with all due respect to the organization earlier that said it must be sexual orientation and gender identity, we all are familiar with the fact that that does not exist in Lawrence, even though it's been tried several times. We want to be like Lawrence, though not on the football field tonight. We don't want to be like Lawrence. I didn't move my family to Lawrence. I moved my family to Manhattan, Kansas. Lawrence can't pass gender identity. They've tried for 20 years. We're trying to be Boulder. We're trying to be San Francisco. Let's take the question of gender identity off of the table. Both sides of the argument have acknowledged that extending protected class status to gender identity is probably not going to fly. So let's take it off the table right now. In an open email by Mayor Snead, he acknowledged that the gender identity issue is very difficult and has not been addressed in many other venues and may not be achievable. So stop, remove it, and focus on the real issue, which would, of course, be sexual orientation. The arguments against this provision, the gender identity provision, are vast and have substantial impact. And actually, I'm going to skip my comments because you've heard gender identity discussed at length already. Let's just agree with Mayor Snead that this is very difficult and it is not achievable, and take it off the table. By taking it off the table now, we allow focused debate on what seems to be the real goal, extending the revered and powerful protected class to lesbians, gays, and bisexuals. So let us consider gay rights in general. They can be created in any number of ways without extension of the revered and powerful protected class. Some options include: use a carrot instead of a stick. What you've been asked to do is recommend a stick on our city, on the businesses in our city. Cleveland, on the other hand, has passed a law that allows corporations to register as an entity that is open to and interested in hiring gays. In prior testimony, it was clear that we want to create a friendly environment for employment of homosexuals. What better way than a database or a listing of employers that have registered here in our town as interested in hiring gays, lesbians, and bisexuals? Let Manco, GTM Sportswear, Steel and Pipe, and anyone else sign up to embrace this based on their own self-determined principles, if they are so inclined, rather than threatening individuals and businesses with complaints, investigations, defense costs, which are both financial and emotional, and fines of $10,000, $25,000, or $50,000 per violation. That's one option. Second option, make a citywide proclamation. Baton Rouge recently tried to simply say that we embrace the homosexual community throughout our town and recognize that they are a special group of people that add much to our culture. This seems innocent enough, but I ought to note that even this watered-down proclamation with no teeth was defeated when a group of local pastors stood up and said that they would not stand by while their city exalted that which God calls sin. The third option would be voluntary compliance with the city vendors. Memphis recently tried to pass gay rights mandates for any vendor that wanted to do business with their city government. All three of these are ideas. Don't take this protected class and move it over to the gay, lesbian, and bisexual identity. Use something else. Use the carrot instead of the stick. Use the proclamation. Use this voluntary compliance with vendors. But again, in Memphis, I should mention that another group of local pastors in Memphis stood up and defeated the proposal. In comparison with what our city is trying to do, these last two options seem very tame. But could it be that our city staff and commission has asked us, or at least been asked to, consider a very liberal policy, such as that which is before you, so that perhaps something more moderate could pass? Rhetorically, is it okay for us to pass something moderate that many other towns have said no to, just because the first thing we were asked to do was so liberal? Obviously, it's an ages-old strategy to ask for something more than you think you can get, when you don't really think you'll get anything at all, in hopes that you'll get something. My recommendation is that you, this board, should do what, like so many other cities, and simply say no. Let me finally comment on the scenario in which the City Commission simply demands that the revered and powerful protected class status will be extended to gays, lesbians, and bisexuals. Again, I think it'll be sexual orientation only, and gender identity will go away, based on comments from the three commissioners, at least two of them. Then what will we do if the City Commission just absolutely demands it, and this board finds themselves in the same position as staff has been for the last several months, and you're told what you're going to do instead of asked? If you do this, remember one thing, which has been the consistent theme of the night. Embrace a truly broad First Amendment exemption, not just a religious organization exemption, but one that goes to the individuals and the businesses and any entity that's in Manhattan, Kansas that makes a decision based on their faith. Don't limit it beyond that. But as a believer in the Bible, as many in this on both sides of the aisle have talked about, as a believer in the Bible, I humbly ask the city to allow me personally to implement my beliefs in every aspect of my life, and not presume to tell me that I can only act on my faith when I am in the four walls of a physical building called a church. I am a small business owner in this town who tries to run my business in a way that honors the good Lord. To the best of my knowledge, I have not interviewed any homosexuals or transgender people, and therefore I have not had to wrestle with the question of what I would do. But as a small business owner, I ask you for the right to make my own decisions based on my faith. And in regard to, I just want to comment briefly about the lawsuit, the concept that if we pass something that doesn't have the right exemptions, it's probably unconstitutional with Kansas Constitution as well as U.S. First Amendment Constitution. I don't believe, actually, that I have to ask the city for the right to make a decision based on my faith. I think the constitutions, both U.S. and Kansas, have already granted me that right. And because of that, I do believe if the City Commission insists on a policy that does not give adequate First Amendment exemptions for all people, not just churches, all individuals and all businesses, that there will be a lawsuit. And we've heard from Alliance Defense Fund that they are willing to do this. They've looked at our policy. They don't think it's going to pass muster in the courts. They'll do this at their own cost, in fact. So we would anticipate that. But the problem with that is, one, they shouldn't have to spend their money on those kind of things. Two, the city, and according to the staff memo, the city of Boulder estimated the cost to the city could be as much as $1.5 million. Do we really want to spend $1.5 million defending a lawsuit brought on by the Alliance Defense Fund or any other organization? So when you look at this, what should we do? First, ask them to show us a need. Second, if they can't show us a need, show us that the people will this to happen, that there's a will to do this. Third, get the gender identity off the table. It's a red herring anyway. And finally, look at other alternatives, something other than the protected classes to apply to gay rights if we're going to pass a gay rights policy of any kind. And finally, if we must do the protected class, make sure that religious exemption is in there. Thank you for your time and consideration.